Welcome, everybody, to the Wizard of Radical Self Respect. We got another late night evening stream here. We're getting into a little bit of a routine with this. It's easier for me to do this on the weekends, and I want to start maybe doing it a day or two during the week as well. But in this episode here, we're going to go over another Dr. Orion Taraban video. The first one I went over of his, I did not agree with as much. But this one, on the other hand, I do agree with this one, and I'm going to explain why. But it's about radical accountability. And I think timing of radical accountability is key. A lot of what I didn't like about his first video is it didn't take into account any timing. If you tell someone the second they get out of an abusive relationship or a relationship with a narcissist to where is your accountability? To me, that's obnoxious and a slap in the face. But also, as I've mentioned before, I don't see myself in relation to a narcissist at all anymore. I don't consider myself a victim, survivor, or even a thriver. And taking extreme ownership and a radical accountability, that's how I got here. And I do think it's important to go over. After that, there's another couple screenshots I'm going to go over that I saw on Threads that I think were pretty interesting. And I think it can help people on their journey. But I want people to be very clear. When I talk about radical accountability, that doesn't mean what's happened to you in a toxic relationship is your fault in any way. There comes a time down the line, though, where I do think it can be a helpful exercise because our power is on our side of the street. You can't forget that. To always externalize the blame is to stay in victim mode. And who does that? Narcissists do that. They're the ones that stay in victim mode because they are always externalizing the blame. Our power is on our side of the street. But let's jump right in here. And I do apologize. There's some foul language in this, perhaps. Or not perhaps. There is. let's hop right in.
I'm Dr. Orion Taraban, and this is PsycHacks, Better Living Through Psychology. And the topic of today's short talk is no one is coming to save you. That's right, guys.
That is a good mindset to have. I agree.
The cavalry isn't coming. This is it. You are the one that you've been waiting for. No one is going to swoop in and give you the life that you feel you deserve. Not me, not your parents, not your therapist, not your priests, not your guru, and absolutely not some woman. And the sooner you figure that out, the sooner your life will start to improve. Time to take some medicine. If you are listening to this content, then you are old enough to assume complete responsibility for the present conditions and future direction of your life.
And this is an attitude that I don't see the harm in taking for ourselves. Granted, like I said before, timing matters. I'm not going to say this to somebody the second they get out of an abusive relationship, but there comes a time down the line where I do think, yes, this is where our power is. What can we learn from the situation where we were mistreated and abused? What I learned in my situation was I wasn't happy and single. And I overlooked all sorts of disrespect because I just wanted to get back to those good feelings of how she made me feel about myself. I wanted her love and approval again. And what is that? That is weak, honestly. That is something that I wasn't practicing radical self-respect. And that's how I came up with the concept of practicing radical self-respect. I asked myself the question, what could I have done differently? And that's what I came up with. I said, oh, if I practiced radical self-respect, I wouldn't have put up with nearly as much as I did. And to be clear, because I know people are going to confuse this, when I say that, taking accountability, practicing radical self-respect, it doesn't mean what happened is my fault. I'm just taking extreme ownership and practicing radical accountability for the things I can change, because that's where my power is.
Trust me. This is for the best. As I've mentioned previously, the definition of responsibility is the ability to respond. And who is able to respond to the conditions of your life? You guessed it, you motherfucker. If your job sucks and women won't date you and you got no friends, and life seems like an intolerable burden, then who resides at the center, at the nexus of all those converging issues? That's right, you motherfucker. You are the common denominator in all of your problems.
And that is true. I mean, whatever our problems are, even if we are in an abusive relationship or even in there's other issues, we are the common denominator. It doesn't mean it was all our fault, but that is also true. And all we can ever do is change ourselves, whether it's enforcing a boundary, learning to walk away, or do something different. Because one thing's for sure, if we're in a bad position, we have to do something different. If nothing changes, nothing changes.
And if no one has told you recently, allow me to remind you, this is not a coincidence. Your problems are precisely your problems because you continue to show up both to yourself and others in ways that run counter to successful outcomes. Do you think you can play the game however you want and still win? Like, how old are you? Where the fuck is that written? What kind of narcissistic grandiosity is that? If you violate the rules of any game, then play cannot continue. If you have
an interesting way to phrase it there too, right? A narcissistic grandiosity to think that we can do whatever we want and still win regardless. And honestly, I think he's right. He's right that we're not always going to win no matter what. We have to sometimes adjust. We have to adapt. We have to do things differently sometimes. To not do that is what? I think that would be a form of entitlement to not do that.
Have no overarching strategy, then victory will be a serendipitous and uncommon outcome. And if you do not train, then you will not improve. This is as true for money and women and happiness as it is for boxing and football and chess. And of course, it makes no difference to your outcomes whether I violate the rules or not, or have an overarching strategy or not, or train or not. I will suffer the consequences and reap the benefits of my action and inaction. This is inescapable. And on some level, you have no right to deprive me of either. We would certainly consider it unjust if, after working overtime to accomplish some important goal, you were to steal my bonus from me. That outcome was the consequence of my good action. It was my due. By the same token, though, it is also unjust if, after slacking off and behaving insubordinately, you were to try to prevent me from getting fired. That outcome was the consequence of my poor action. It was my due as well. Never stand between a person and the consequences of their actions. Doing so is a form of theft, one way or another.
Now, that is an interesting way to see it as well, because I do know, especially people that have a good heart or they really want to try to help people out, they may try to prevent people from receiving the consequences of their actions. But as he said here, that is not always a good thing to do. Sometimes people need those consequences because that's what's going to help them to grow. If they always get out of accountability or consequences, some people will never learn. And some people, even when they do get consequences, they will still never learn. But even so, I'd rather still see that happen than have people protect people from consequences and then sabotage their growth. This is something that parents mess up a lot too, honestly, especially as their kids get older. A lot of them will try to protect their kids from the bad consequences of life. And don't get me wrong, there are some things you should absolutely protect your kids from. But there's other things that if you try to protect them from everything, you are now sabotaging their growth. And I've made videos before about how an overprotective mother can harm their sons, for example, because that's one of the things that they do. They try to protect them from every possible negative outcome. And then they solve problems for them. They don't let their sons do it for themselves. And then that son gets robbed the opportunity to learn how to grow and how to handle adversity. if they never have to do it, they never build that muscle. And if you don't use a muscle, what happens? It atrophies. But unfortunately for those kids, they never get a chance to work it to begin with. And so they never develop it. And the only way I've gotten some people to really understand that is I would ask women, I would say, what kind of man do you want? Do you want the guy that is able to solve problems, is able to take care of himself and be assertive and be a leader in his own life? Or do you want the guy that's going to be reliant on his mother for everything, who can't solve problems because his mother or father did that for him, and they've hamstrung their children in those cases? But when I frame it like that, then people get it. But if I don't, then it can be a little more difficult. So that was a long-winded way to say the calm sea never made a skilled sailor, and not all adversity and difficulties and challenges are bad. Some of them are actually very helpful for our growth, but we have to have the right attitude and mindset for that. And again, I'm not talking about completely unnecessary nonsense here either. There are things that I won't say will provide you any growth. But once anything has happened to us, though, I am still for trying to make the best of everything, because we can't go back and put the toothpaste back in the tube. But of course, there are some things, if you had a choice, you would never say, yes, I'm glad this thing has happened to me. But once that bad thing has happened, well, now you can still try to make the best of it. And I'm not saying that's going to be easy, but what other choice do you have?
And if this is true for me, it is true for you. This is why I like to remind my patients from time to time that I get paid either way. Like, why should I care more than you whether you succeed? It's not like I'm going to get a bonus if your life gets better. I don't get to experience the benefits of your loving relationship or your healthy sense of self. You do. By the same token, why should I care more than you whether you fail? I don't suffer the secret misery of your self-hatred or the helpless frustration of your victimhood. You do.
And that's a good point there too. When I was going to NA and AA, there was a saying there that a sponsor, because people, when they go to those programs, you get a sponsor, and the sponsor is supposed to guide you through the steps, the 12 steps. And there was a saying that a sponsor should only ever match the sponsee's effort. And I think that is a very good thing to remember, because if you're trying to help someone more than they're even trying to help themselves, that's a bad spot to put yourself in. And again, people that would describe themselves as good-hearted or an empath, even though empath isn't my favorite word, those are kinds of things that they do. And then they often get themselves into bad situations because they were trying to do the work for this other person, and that other person is the only person that can help themselves. Match someone's effort at most, because if you try to do more than them, you are also robbing them of the growth. You are robbing them of them getting better on their own. You can help, you can guide, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make that horse drink.
Just like I'm not going to take credit for your success, I'm also not going to take responsibility for your failure. That's the agreement. Everything else is bullshit. And it might be useful for you to examine to what extent you want to continue to credit yourself for your successes while simultaneously holding others responsible for your failures. You can't have it both.
And that's an interesting way to put it too. If you're going to try to take credit for your success, but then outsource the blame for your failures, what kinds of people do that? I would say I've made posts about that before. Narcissistic people, they outsource the blame when things go poorly, and then they try to hoard the credit when things go well. Can't have it both ways. I agree.
Both ways. And trust me, it will be better for you if you take possession of both than to deny the ownership of either. Not only can no one else improve your life except you, no one else will experience the consequences of your actions and inactions except you as well. This is why your life is your responsibility. If you're interested in taking your understanding to the next level, I would encourage you to check out the Captain's Quarters. my members only. People are subject to slipping into a victim mentality and wallowing in resentment and self-pity. However, no one can move forward while in the place of a victim. You cannot progress if you remain the object of other people's malevolence. And people.
And this is a very good point to go over here, too. If we're only the victim of someone, then yes, we can absolutely be a victim. But if we never try to grow through that, then there's no growth. And this is what I think of when I see both men and women. Sometimes you see this online all the time, whether it's TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, or Threads, Facebook. There's a lot of men, they blame all women. There's a lot of women who blame all men. And there's a lot of big accounts right now on Facebook and Instagram, for example, the Chris Perrys of the world, Darius Jacksons of the world. Other times it's the MGTOW or Red Pill space, but they blame. The problem is always on the outside. And that's ultimately my problem with people like Chris Perry, because I get it. His content can be very helpful for women when they are just getting out of an abusive relationship. It's very validating and supportive and encouraging. But there comes a point when validation alone is not enough, because there's no growth in just validation alone. It takes uncomfortable feelings sometimes to grow. Growth is not comfortable. And if you never challenge someone, how is that person going to grow? And granted, there's an art to being able to challenge someone without being too harsh about it, for sure. One of my ways to do that with clients is you can couch things in between a compliment sandwich. You'll say something like, oh, you're really good at this, then say the challenging thing, and then follow it up with another compliment. That's a good way to couch a challenge so that it's more easily absorbed and received. But this is all important. You can't just get the validation part, because those pages, they keep on outsourcing the blame. And when you outsource the blame, what does that make you? It makes you powerless. If the issue is always somewhere else, what does that make you? It makes you a powerless victim of that circumstance. I don't like that. Part of practicing radical self-respect is the opposite of that. It is taking extreme ownership and practicing radical accountability. And again, just because we do that doesn't mean how we've been treated is our fault. It does not mean, yes, if you were abused, it's all your fault. No, that's not what it means. It just means that we take a look at our side to see what we can do differently if the same situations were to arise again in the future. My goal is to empower people to the point that it would be the least likely those kinds of things ever happen again. And honestly, isn't that what every creator or coach or counselor or therapist, isn't that all what they would want for their clients or students, or fill in the blank with whatever you want to call them? I think so. That's my goal for the people. And I always try to emphasize, looking at our side does not mean it was your fault. We just want to learn what we can from the situation. I have a saying, LMO. In every situation, there is something to learn, a meaning, and an opportunity we can assign to it. And for me, this has been a great way to grow through the obstacles and try to make the best of them. It always reminds me of a commencement speech that Jim Carrey made, and it was just probably 5 to 10 years ago by now. But he said, you know what? I don't know if life happens for you or to you, but he says, I try to act like it happens for me. That way I am best able to handle the obstacles that come my way. And I thought to myself when I first heard that, that's exactly right. Why wouldn't you want to see it that way? Because if you want to handle things in the best way possible, the most emotionally mature way possible, and have the best results, what other way would you look at it? And again, sometimes you have to see the end goals here. What do you want? Do you want to be a victim? Are you just trying to get victimhood validated? Or do you really want good results? Do you really want to improve yourself? Because depending on what you want to do, your actions and words are probably going to look a little bit different. And that's something to keep in mind.
People are malevolent, or at least they can be. They are disappointing and selfish at best, and envious and sadistic at worst. People can hurt you, both intentionally and unintentionally, as you move through the world. This is inescapable. However, you can only move forward if you become the subject of your own life's story, which includes assuming responsibility for the circumstances and conditions of your existence, irrespective of what has happened to you. This is important. Irrespective of what has happened to you means there are no exceptions. No matter the betrayal or the neglect or the injustice or the cruelty that you experienced, you assume responsibility for the circumstances and conditions created by this treatment.
And to be very clear about this, so the people watching me that have been abused in abusive relationships with a narcissist, borderline, etc., doing that does not mean it was your fault. And as I've said before, I don't ever tell someone that instantly to go do that. And I made the video where I broke down this very same guy's content before, and I said why I disagreed with it, because he wasn't giving people that space. Timing is important. I support, encourage, and validate. And then depending on the person, down the line, we assume responsibility. Responsibility does not mean it's our fault. It's having the wisdom to understand that's where our power is. Our power is in what we can control, our side of the street, and acting as if, well, what if I could have changed the situation? What would that have looked like? And to me, that's an example of an empowering question. And again, people get caught up on this because whenever I even touch on this subject, then people think you're blaming the victim. What's wrong with you? You're a monster. But if you really want to get to a good place, there comes a point where I think this kind of mindset becomes very helpful. As I said, it's how I have gotten to where I am in my life. And there's a lot of people that are very successful. You will notice a lot of them can have a very similar mindset and they have a similar attitude towards things. And I don't think that is a coincidence. And again, I'll say it again. What do you want? Do you really want to improve and get better results? Or would you really just rather get validated, even if being validated is holding you back? Because you better believe it, that does happen sometimes.
This is radical accountability, and it will accelerate your growth significantly. Indeed, the more you assume responsibility, the faster your life will improve.
I agree with that 100%.
There is a direct and unbreakable relationship between the two. Take responsibility for what has happened to you and notice what happens. Over the course of my life, I've suffered a number of betrayals at the hands of friends, family, and lovers. For years, my head was full of ideas on how they should have behaved, how they should have treated me. And those ideas filled my heart with pain and resentment. It wasn't good for me, chat. And it wasn't until I had a long, hard talk with the man in the mirror that I was able to start to liberate myself from that emotional prison. Because after all, whose fucking decision was it to trust those people? Who chose those friends or committed to those lovers? Even in the case of family, who continued to make an effort to maintain those relationships? It was me who did those things. I chose to become friends with people who couldn't reciprocate my friendship, which was a very stupid thing for me to do.
And so, in regards to that, again, I'm not saying that means something is your fault, but if we do adopt that attitude, I do think it's the most pragmatic attitude to have. But again, I'm not going to say that to someone right away, but there comes a time down the line where that's part of asking ourselves, oh, what could I have done differently here? And I think that's a very empowering question to ask. I think if we want the best results, those are the kinds of things we ask ourselves when the time is ready and the time is right. But again, I'm not going to ever say that to someone and do what I would call weaponizing accountability, when someone is immediately getting out of a toxic relationship and then they get bombarded with, where is your accountability? You need to look at your side. You must have psychological issues for dealing with those kinds of people. And it's like, dude, you don't understand. And I can say that they don't understand because they don't understand the frog in a boiling pot analogy of abuse. And I also agree with radical accountability. How do I agree with both? It's all about the timing. I do agree eventually with radical accountability, and that doesn't mean it's your fault. But I also agree with people don't know what I didn't know. And sometimes that is what you learn from it. I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know about narcissistic abuse, coercive control, gaslighting, word salad, Darvo, deny, accuse, reverse victim and offender, moving the goalpost, flipping the script, twisting and distorting everything I've said. I didn't understand those things, and I got sucked in by them. It happens to the best of us. I think it can happen to anyone. Part of radical accountability in that situation is getting the education about it, getting the awareness about it. And then once we have the education, we have the awareness, now we can see those kinds of things from a mile away. But watch out for those people out there that instantly blame someone and say, oh, any idiot could have seen that from a mile away. It's like, no, jackass. No, they couldn't have seen that from a mile away. Or maybe they thought it was just like their upbringing growing up. They had narcissistic parents or abusive parents, and this new person just reminded them of home. So the people who are completely dismissive and want to blame someone right away and do what I call weaponized accountability, I really dislike those kinds of people. But again, I think both of these concepts can be true at the same time. The only difference is the timing in which they are said.
I committed to lovers who weren't able to remain loyal. I continued to maintain a one-sided relationships with family members. No one forced me to bring these people into my life. In fact, in most cases, I worked very hard to get and keep them in it. It was all my fault, which was an incredible revelation. Because if I could make bad choices that contributed to my suffering, it meant that I could make better choices to alleviate that same suffering as well.
And that's where the empowerment comes in. Because if you're just a victim, no power there. But when you take accountability and you take extreme ownership, now we are more in charge of our destiny. And to me, that is a very empowering place to be. That's where we want to be, in charge, knowing that, okay, we can make the best of all of these situations. And what does that look like? Well, that depends on what your goals are. Not everyone's going to want to get back into a romantic relationship, but this attitude applies to all areas of life. It applies to business, it applies to friendships, it applies to any area you can think of. And I don't really see the harm in trying to see life this way. Again, as long as it's not being weaponized against someone in a form of weaponized accountability. That is a slap in the face to people. I'm not for that. But down the line, I am for it. I am for taking a look at our side, I should say.
I had the ability to respond to those conditions. I didn't simply have to continue on as I always had, nor did I have to wait for anyone's permission to make changes. The license to do so always ever resided in me. Assuming radical responsibility, the attitude that everything that happens to you, for good or for bad, is your fault, is one of the most effective means of self-development that you have at your disposal. It will motivate you to seek out actionable lessons to change your behavior so that it is more aligned with reality moving forward. There are ways to become financially successful. There are ways to have more satisfying relationships. There are ways to have a strong and healthy body. There are ways to feel happy and contented. There are ways to do all of these things. And if you act counter to these ways, then you are likely going to suffer, but you are certainly not going to achieve the outcome you desire. In which case, it would be better to either surrender the frustrating desire, which is hard to do, or bring your behavior more in line with reality, which is also hard to do, but which at least holds out the possibility of success. Again, no one is coming to save you, my dudes. You are your own cavalry. Assume absolute responsibility for your life and see what happens. You can start right now, right where you are. You don't have to read a book. You don't have to save up money. You don't have to relocate to some other part of the world. You can start today with what you currently have, because what you have and have always had is the ability to respond to the conditions of your life. All you're doing, like an errant prince, is ascending to your power in a conscious and intentional way. What do you think? Does this fit with your own experience? Let me know in the comments below.
All right. So, considering I don't talk about that very much, I think that's an important thing to go over. So we're going to move this bad boy here. So yeah, I think like I said, I don't talk about that side of it anymore, but I do think it's important for me to address that because that is how I see my life now. And granted, I say I see it that way, but I fully acknowledge it is sometimes uncomfortable to do that. And I might get a little bit annoyed if someone who's a friend of mine or someone who has my best interest at heart, they say something to me. And if I'm not ready for it, I might get annoyed. But that part of me might be a childish part of me that is getting annoyed. And I fully recognize that sometimes too. Timing is important. And I try to see my life in that way now because to me, it is the most empowering attitude to have. And I think it's important to share that. Dad. Yep. Dad is me. That is me. All right. And now I want to go over a couple things I saw on Threads here. This will be interesting as well. So, there we are. So, this woman on Threads says, this is interesting. Imagine fixing a man's balding hair, clearing his skin, introducing him to vegetables, taking him to your dermatologist, meal prepping him until he could halfway match your energy, and putting him on to luxury skincare and designer cologne through your PR packages, all for him to live a lie behind your back. Ladies, do not upgrade these men. Return them to their type. Bald, broken out, and surviving off gas station food. So, what does that sound like? It sounds like a woman that's been burned there. And granted, I understand what you're saying too, and part of it I actually agree with. And I agree with it for the comment I'm about to show you. So that was the original comment. And then this person responded to it. And he says, now notice how he even worded this. And I invited this gentleman on the show, and we got to schedule a time to do it, but he's going to come on. And he says, I hear your frustration, and honestly, it's valid. Take note out there if you want to give someone truly constructive criticism, where, and I don't even know if criticism is the right word for it here, but you want it to be well received. This is a good way to do it. I hear your frustration. They feel understood and heard, and honestly, it's valid. Great start. Now, I might not have said but. I would have said and here's the truth. You didn't get played. You gambled on potential instead of reality. You saw what could be, not what was. That kind of love is noble, but it's risky. Next time, choose a man who's already walking in the standards you value, not one you have to build from the ground up. It's not your job to raise him. It's your job to receive him. And I think that's a good way. That's a good way to see it for both men and women. You don't want to get too blinded by someone's potential. You want to always keep in mind what is in front of your eyes. How are they right now? I always say, if you have to hope they would go back to the way they were, or you have to really hope they're going to change, that's a problem. And that woman there, it sounds like she went to Home Depot to find a dude and she got a fixer-upper and she thought she was a Build-A-Bear woman there and she did all these things for him, but she might have been doing what I talked about in the previous clip. She was putting in more effort than that man was willing to do himself. The most she ever should have done was match his effort to grow. And that in any kind of healthy partnership, you want to find someone that is on equal ground as you, or at least pretty close to that. And that's going to be a person that they've done the work on themselves. They're in a good position in life. You were on equivalent ground, not someone that really needs to pull this other person up, because maybe that person's not ready to change. Maybe they don't want to change, because those are the other things. I have 3 rules for giving. 1, or helping for that matter. Does that person even want to help themselves? Because if not, you got to stop trying, because now they're putting in 0 effort. Matching 0 effort is 0 effort. Keep that in mind. The next part is, are they willing to do something about it and recognize it's even an issue? Because if they're not willing or recognize, again, no use. And then, are they putting in the footwork to change? And if someone is putting in the footwork, okay, if you're there for them, you're on their team, you can match their effort in that case. But that's really it. But a lot of people, I think, they get themselves in trouble because they have this idea of what love is. They have this idea that, well, I would do all these things for this person if I love them. But there's a wisdom in knowing when to let people do the work themselves. And I think in this day and age in particular, there's a lot of people who miss that. They don't realize the wisdom in letting people get some consequences, in letting people do the work and grow on their own. It doesn't look good sometimes from the outside. You might want to really save them from consequences or protect them from all these negative outcomes, but it's really not your responsibility to do so. And if they're not doing that for themselves, they're not putting in the footwork, taking accountability for themselves, what are you doing? What are you doing? They're not willing. They're not even trying. And maybe that's what that woman who was the one this person's replying here to, maybe that's what she was doing. She was trying a little too hard to help a guy that didn't even want to help themselves. And then the guy cheated. And then she's probably the kind of woman that would relate to that meme. Being good doesn't get you loved. Being good gets you used. And as I always say, if anyone I know relates to that, I would ask them the question, what is your definition of good? Because unfortunately, a lot of the people that get burned, their definition of good is endless second chances, projecting all of their good qualities onto someone else, overlooking bad behavior, overlooking disrespect, paying attention to their words more than their actions, and not remembering actions speak the loudest of all, and your actions communicate what your priorities are and what you find important. Neglect those important lessons, then you can wind up in some bad spots. And if that woman were to put that over that dude's behavior, I bet you he would not have checked those off in a good place. And he said, oh, his actions were probably communicating some of that. And it sounds like he was just enjoying like her trying to do all this stuff for him, and he was taking things as he could, but he really wasn't meeting her halfway. And then she got a little upset and resentful, understandably so. But part of her taking radical accountability and extreme ownership would be taking a look at her part in the situation. And that does not mean it's her fault. Does not mean it's her fault, but it is what she can change. All she can change is herself. And that is true. Doesn't mean how he treated her was her fault. Doesn't mean it's her fault that that guy cheated. No. But she can take a look at what could I have done differently. That's where her power is. And there's 2 kinds of people out there. The kinds of people that understand that because they truly want better results. And then there's the people that don't understand that. They want to be a victim. They want their victimhood validated. And those kinds of people stay stuck, unfortunately. And I don't like it to be black and white, but that's how I see it now. And I think, again, timing matters. I wouldn't tell that person instantly, like, no, you should be, and weaponize accountability against them. And this guy, maybe he did do that a little bit. I'm not sure the timing of all this, but he did try to say something in a understanding way, a way that had the receiver in mind. It wasn't just him selfishly saying what came to his mind to make himself feel good or to virtue signal to other people that might agree with him. He actually said something in a way that made it most likely she was willing to listen. And at that point, he does that. It's most likely to be received well, and she might actually do something different. That's what I would say. What's going on there, curious one? I did a little breakdown of Dr. Orion Taraban's video about radical accountability, title, No One's Coming to Save You. And he's right. Let's see here. But that's enough of that. And so this was her thing, just to remind people what she even said. Imagine fixing a man's balding hair, clearing his skin, introducing him to vegetables, taking him to your dermatologist, meal prepping him until he could halfway match your energy, and putting him on to luxury skincare and designer cologne through your PR packages, all for him to live a lie behind your back. I wonder what that means. Sounds like he had a double life. We talk about on this channel a lot. Narcissistic people often have a double life or an entire secret world in their phones where they have all sorts of maybe addictions or people they're seeing and sleeping with, etc. And so she says, ladies, do not upgrade these men. Return them to their type. Bald, broken out, and surviving off gas station food. But I would also challenge her to say, why were you attracted to a person like that to begin with? What was that all about? She must have seen something. There must have been something that guy had going for him for her to want to do all that. And the chances are it was too much. But again, it's not her fault that guy treated her poorly. That's not her fault. But she can take a look at all of this. If she truly doesn't want to have it happen again, okay, what did I do here? Sounds like I was doing too much. And that guy who said, you want someone to be there already. It's not your job to be the Build-A-Bear. It's not your job to be going to Home Depot to get a fixer-upper. You want someone who's already done a lot of this stuff and who can meet you on your level. To me, that's important. And I think once the toxic relationships are over too, once you've understood what toxic relationships are like, you understand narcissism, coercive control, etc., then it really just comes down to compatibility at that point. Once we find and understand narcissistic abuse, coercive control, then it's all about who are we compatible with and what are the clues that we're compatible with someone. A big part of it is emotional safety. And again, we got to do the work to even get to this point anyway, because if you don't do the work on yourself, and then you're trying to find someone you are compatible with, it's still going to go poorly because you aren't well adjusted. You might still be bleeding on those who didn't cut you. And when you're in that place, even if you meet a great person, you're not ready for it. You're not ready to handle it. And before you say, well, if I met a great person, they would understand that. Well, not necessarily. And it's not even their responsibility to understand that. If you aren't on their level, why should they stay? Why would they? In fact, if someone truly did, it would make me question what their motives were at that point. Why? Why are they even doing this? And this is what I had said when I was dating borderline women years ago. I thought I was in such a great place. I'm in this healthy place. And I thought they were the ones that were really out of control. I was good. But I was fooling myself. I was fooling myself because if I was really doing so good, I would have been repelled. I wouldn't have even tolerated any of it. I would have left to attract someone more on my level. But the problem was that was more my level. I just didn't know it. And I think there's a lot of people who are in that spot. And they don't recognize it, though, at the time. It's very difficult to recognize these things in the moment. Looking back, then we can see it. Hindsight's 2020 for a reason. But back then, yeah, I had my life a little more put together, but there was definitely things that I was struggling with. I wasn't as good as I thought I was. And Teal Swan has a video about that too, when we're with someone who is struggling, maybe with an addiction or a personality disorder, and that's your pattern. She said part of that could very easily be you like being the good guy. And when you're the good guy or the good girl and you're complaining about your partner because your partner always seems to have some issues, you like playing that role of being the guy who or girl who has more of their stuff together. But that is not a good dynamic. That's a dynamic where It might even be a way to not get challenged. It's a way you know this person isn't really going to call you out. They're not going to help you to grow. And maybe you go there because you know you're not going to be challenged. So it could almost be considered a cowardly thing to do in that case, where if we're truly with someone on our level, they might lovingly call us out about some things. And they might force us to take a look at things that we don't want to take a look at because it hurts or it's painful. That's not harm, though. That is the good kind of painful. That is the painful that can lead to growth. That is the discomfort that can lead to growth. That is different. That is different than being harmed. That makes total sense. If you're not at your best by working on yourself and knowing yourself well, you'll attract others who are the same. Exactly right. And honestly, there's a lot of people who are in that spot. And I think whether it's a man doing it or a woman doing it, there's a lot of both who simply think, I'm good. Or they'll gender the whole thing and they'll say, men are good. It's women that are the problem. They're the ones that are 304s, as they'll say. They're the ones that are sleeping around too much or doing whatever. And then there's women who do the opposite. Where are all the men that have done the emotional work? We're over here. We're all great. We're great. We're emotionally regulated. We have a good job. We've gone to therapy. But all these guys, they're all immature. They haven't done the work. And we're just blowing right past them. And just that very attitude of it, I'm thinking to myself, you're not perfect. No one is perfect. Someone who has an attitude of humility, what do? They know there's always more to improve. No matter who you are, there's always ways that we can grow, which is why I like the expression, be so busy improving yourself, you don't have time to criticize others. And again, there is a time for criticizing and calling people out. But in terms of doing it in a general way, I mean, unless we're perfect, who are we to say anything? There's always more things that we can be doing. This is the reason I don't like it when people say they're healed, because I think healing is a process. I don't think there's such a thing as healed. You might be able to heal from an abusive situation, but in terms of total healing, I don't really agree with that as a concept. I think a better way to see it is there's always work to be done. We can always be growing. We can always be in the act of recovery. And that's how people who go to AA and NA, that's how they see it too. And I do happen to agree with that part of it, because for them, they would say, once you think you're healed, then you're on dangerous ground, because now you risk being arrogant and you risk losing your humility. And those who are not humble are often humiliated. Those who are too arrogant often get humiliated as well. Those are important things to remember too. But I like healing as a process, and it's never ending. And there's always more things that we can do. And so if you're a woman out there that is saying, where are all these guys? None of these guys have done the work. I think a better question to ask yourself would be, why am I not attracting the guys who have? Where are they? Because there aren't 0 guys who have done the work. And just as I would say to men, there are not all women who are out of control. There are women who are good too. There are women who are in a good place. And the question to ask yourself is, why am I not attracting those people into my life? That's for men to ask and for women to ask. It's an uncomfortable question, perhaps, but it's also an empowering question. It takes no courage to blame the other. If you're a woman blaming men, that takes no courage. If you're a man blaming women, that takes no courage. Now, there are times when individually people can mess up. And I think there are times to point things out in that case. But other than that, all we can do is take a look at our side of the street. But in the same token, though, what everyone does matter. What everyone does, it does matter. We are all connected to a point. And what people's morals and values are, and what people hold in high regard, that matters. That matters on a society level, because if people's morals and values and standards go down, then that's going to impact a lot of things. And so I think that's a different argument, though. that's a different argument and an argument for another time. But as I talk more about current event stuff, I think we'll go over more of that. I'm going to be talking more about dating stuff soon, more current event stuff, because there'll be time to push through the narcissism topic here. I've made a lot of content about narcissism. I don't know if I'll ever completely leave it behind, but I also want to spread my wings here too. And another thing to look forward to coming up next week, I got a guy named Anthony. I interviewed him once before. We're going to go over how AI terms are being co-opted, and they're being, the same words are being used differently for social media. But I interviewed him before about systems. He's going to talk to me again on Tuesday. Probably upload that the next day. And then next week, I'm also talking to Dr. Simon and Dr. Salerno. We have some interesting news that I'm not sure Dr. Salerno wants me to talk about it, but we'll see. We'll probably talk about some of it when we talk there. I think you'll find it interesting out there as well, because it overlaps. It overlaps with what I've done here. So could be interesting, but I think that'll be something that everyone will appreciate. I'm going to ask people too, in maybe the YouTube community section, if you want to ask any questions to Dr. Simon or Dr. Salerno, let me know. And the ones that I find interesting as well, I'll try to pass them along to see what they think the answers are. But in that interview, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Dr. Salerno ask Dr. Simon like the things that he's curious about. And then I'll start the ball rolling and we'll take it from there. But, all right. And next week, I'm going to start this earlier too, because I started this a little bit later today. And then the regulars will be back into the chat, because the only regular here now is the curious one. But next time, I'll probably be here tomorrow night too. But with that, unless anyone else has any questions, I think I'm going to wrap this up here. All right. Remember to subscribe to the channel here if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell so you'll be notified when I come up with more videos. Like the video if you liked it. Comment below your thoughts and share this video with someone else that you think might benefit from taking extreme ownership and practicing radical accountability. All right. Over and out.